We are finally at the end of the Light and Dark saga. Your prophecy is about to be upon us. This now is the perfect time to sum up all of the thoughts on the game as it is currently, what I think the future will hold for us, the current sandbox, the sandbox to come, and if I think Edge of Fate is going to be any good, and what will be after that. In terms of the current sandbox, to be honest, outside of raids, to me, the loot feels somewhat samey, at least the loot worth keeping. Like, how many of our god rolls right now are just Envious Arsenal and Bait and Switch? Literally 3 of the 4 grenade launchers from my day 1 raid prep video were Envious Bait and Switch. Having said that, I do think there are a good number of perks, especially on special and primary weapons. I do wish there were more good heavy weapon perks, but as long as Bait and Switch exists in the state that it does, it's probably just going to be really, really good. In terms of how different weapon classes and frames are holding up, I think the balance is actually pretty good. Linears, obviously, are just cooking ridiculously hard right now, but that's mostly because of particle reconstruction, which basically makes linears just god tier anytime it's around. As of right now, that meta does feel a little stale, and if I, the number 1 precision damage enjoyer, am getting sick of that meta, that's how you know it's a problem. However, once we get a new artifact and the new balance patch goes live, this will be alleviated. Also, holy sh**, they turned Hierarchy of Needs into Yallerbow. Levy Breath is back on the menu, boys. Woo! As of right now, the gameplay loop is mostly just prep for the day 1 raid, and if you're not prepping for it, then you're probably doing, what the hell even is the average Destiny player doing right now? I mean, I guess probably right at the 9 stuff? I don't know. Maybe I'm out of touch with the casuals. The gameplay loop feeling somewhat stale right before an expansion launch is nothing new. I'm not worried by this at all. This is just the natural progression of the game slowing down. Most people, if they're even hopping on this game at all right now, are going to do some grinding, maybe play a raid with their friends, and then hop off. And for the most part, that's fine. There's only so many ways to make shooting aliens fun, and I think the current ways that we have to shoot aliens is very good. Speaking of which, let's talk about the content currently in this game, namely the most recent stuff. As of the time that I'm recording this, I haven't played Salvation's Edge, so I won't really talk about it, but we're going to talk about the stuff I have played, which is starting with the dungeon. After that, we're going to Rite of the Nine. Vesper's host brought us back to Europa, or, Europa Orbit, and gave us some Deep Stone Crypt-style mechanics with a more solo doable vibe. I think the dungeon mechanics are incredible. Having multiple people doing multiple jobs to speed things up feels amazing, and come to think of it, this is the first dungeon I can think of to not just suggest, but require communication between team members in a group setting. The first encounter is nothing too crazy. I enjoy this sort of intro to what we're going to be working with for the rest of the dungeon. No real complaints here. The Ranix boss fight is, well, it's a mixed bag for me. I think the mechanics themselves are really, really cool. Having to read the actual enemies for information is very innovative and awesome, and the enemy density is insane. Please give us more of this energy elsewhere, because it's awesome. Where I think the fight falls flat, though, is in the damage. The concept is very cool, having to damage multiple targets all linked to the same health bar, but oh my god, does this feel inconsistent as hell. I feel like my damage phases are either ridiculous, insane, holy shit, post this on Twitter, or just barely anything. I'm not entirely sure why this is. Maybe it's just inconsistency with the way that the servitors spread. Maybe it's something to do with the way multiple entities linked to the same health bar works. No idea. Overall, I'm giving that second encounter an 8 out of 10. Then we have Corrupted Puppeteer. And oh god, is this a fight of all time. Sometimes, this encounter makes me feel like God. Other times, it makes me want to slam my head into a wall repeatedly until I get brain damage. In all honesty, I think this encounter just has too much going on. And at least it was for me. I really hope this dungeon is the most mechanically challenging thing we see out of a dungeon for a pretty long time. Damage phase is fun and interesting. Not being able to sit in a well and shoot the boss repeatedly feels very frantic and intense. I like, but it definitely sucks when you get a bad damage phase, and you know you have to slog through everything all over again for just a chance at redemption on the next go. I'm giving this dungeon a 9 out of 10, even if I gave it a pretty scathing review, for I enjoyed it a lot, but I still have some gripes. I ultimately think that this kind of dungeon is just made for a much more hardcore player than myself. Believe it or not, I do have my limits, and for those kind of players, this experience is awesome. Good job, Bungie. Under Doctrine is the second dungeon of the Final Shape Dungeon Key, and I gotta say, I like this one quite a lot. Not nearly as much as Vesper's Host, but I do think it's very fun. The first encounter is a bit of a slog, if I'm being honest. When I was going through the solo flawless for this encounter is the one that I probably spent the most time on, despite the fact that I don't think I ever actually died in it. I'm not really sure how to make this encounter feel like less of a slog. Having multiple people definitely helps for sure, but can't always rely on that since these things have to be soloable. There's not really an elegant way to fix this, if I'm being honest. 2 fill-in-the-blank puzzles would definitely be too few, but 3 for sure is too many. Outside of that, I think being able to use the lore for the game itself as a mechanic in the dungeon is awesome, even if it's not required, so good stuff there. Lock set almost just feels like Ranix 2.0 with the boss being multiple Shriekers instead of just one thing. This also led to a really funny strat where Stormcallers are able to Chaos Reach all 4 of the lock set targets at once, which does ridiculous damage with Geomags, and if you stack multiple Warlocks, this just gets insane. Outside of that, the unifying creative damage solutions to deal with multiple targets at once felt very fun and creative. I think that the arena is maybe a little large on a solo scale, but outside of that, my gripes are mostly with how hard it can feel to recover a run once things do get out of hand, but if I'm being honest, that's kind of a skill issue. Finally, with the final encounter, I thought the fight was a solid B-tier encounter. I think these rooms each having their own gimmick was fun to deal with, the doors to those rooms having been introduced earlier in the dungeon. Having to light up the lie instead of the truth felt like a neat version of expectations, even if it was just a minor one, and I did enjoy the more traditional stand in a well and shoot the boss sort of damage phase after Lockset. This is definitely a much more chill experience than Vesper's Host, but I thought it was still plenty challenging and fun, so it gets an 8 out of 10 for I liked it a lot, but I'd rather run Vespers. Now let's talk about our seasonal activities before we move on to Rite of the Nine. Our first seasonal activity for Heresy was the Nether, which is a 30-ish minute roguelike style mode consisting of a few different objectives with different buffs you can pick up and just, use them during the run. This also saw the return of the Dreadnought, which feels amazing to have in the game. The only criticism I have of the Nether is that it can get a little long by the time I'm on the 3rd boss fight. I like the restricted healing as well as the limited revives. So the healing restriction was definitely a bit overtuned at the start of the season, but it got later adjusted. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10 for I liked it a lot, but not as much as some other stuff. The other activity we got was Court of Blades, which was about a 10 to 15 minute adventure, definitely shorter than the Nether, and had modifiers to keep each one interesting that stacked round over round as well as purchasable upgrades. I thought this was a nice alternative to the Nether, namely the fact that it wasn't nearly as long, was a nice change of pace, because let me tell you, trying to do my pinnacles through the Nether sucked balls. So I guess that's kind of my fault for trying to do them all in one day. I ultimately liked Court of Blades better than the Nether, but I think they were both fun experiences in their own right and aged pretty well. Finally, talking about the newest stuff, which is Rite of the Nine. Let's just ignore the goofy schedule for a second. We'll talk more about that in a bit. The idea of Rite of the Nine was to be a Pantheon-esque style experience for dungeons instead of raids, with revamps for Ghosts of the Deep, Spire of the Watcher, and Prophecy, along with some updated loot tools and a new resource called Nonary Manifolds to give you some extra rewards. In addition, each of these weapons has an Adept version from the Ultimatum difficulty of each dungeon, which is like Master++. Why we didn't just call these Normal, Expert, and Master is beyond me, but fucking, I don't know. The Adepts, for some reason, don't have selectable perks, which means they just have the Adept mods and the extra stats from Masterworking. I feel like that was definitely a miss. In addition to the Giga Ultra Mega Giganto difficulty that is Ultimatum, there's also the Explorer mode, which was the first time that Bungie's ever really tried a learner mode in these kinds of activities. Not only does the enemy difficulty get scaled way down, and is actually scaled with the size of your fire team, meaning going through this solo doesn't feel that bad, it actually feels pretty good. It also gives you a bunch of different tooltips to learn as well as waypoint markers. I think it was an excellent addition to the environment, though stopping to read in the middle of combat was a bit problematic since you're still getting shot at, even if you aren't in any danger of wiping since the whole thing is never a darkness zone, and you're not gonna die. It still feels very unnatural to stop and try to read what the hell is going on. I thought the updates to the dungeon were a very welcome addition, especially in Prophecy, which was really starting to show its age. I think that thing is like, 6 years old at this point? So the cube having basically no updates, that was, that's a choice of all time. The updates to the dungeons were a combination of making the encounters feel less like a slog, mostly in Ghosts of the Deep, and a little bit of challenge to keep things fresh. Now let's talk about the problems. And, well, there are two major ones. The first was the schedule, which, well, let's just say the community didn't really follow that at first. There was a bug where people were getting into the Rite of the 9 instances of these dungeons early, which was pretty quickly patched, and the broken weapons were removed from inventories, which was funny, but if I'm being honest, probably not the biggest problem in the world. When the event did properly launch, everyone was excited and absolutely just obliterating Spire the Watcher, getting their gold clears, and then going to do other things for the week so they could come back for Ghost of the Deep next week, only for everyone to log in next Tuesday and see that it was still Spire of the Watcher, and not Ghosts of the Deep. There was naturally some community uproar since we were told that these would be rotators, and our knowledge, they didn't rotate properly. It was still Spire of the Watcher, only for Bungie to come out and tell us that this was, in fact, not a bug and completely intentional. Bungie had planned on releasing these dungeons on a 3-week rotation schedule. People were naturally pretty pissed, because if you'd already gotten everything you needed from Spire in the first week, you basically had nothing to do for half of a month. Now, to Bungie's credit, they did adjust the schedule, putting the dungeons on a 2-week rotator instead of a 3-week rotator, and running extended periods of all of these dungeons being available, with additional manifolds being available at the time. Do I think people were justified in being upset? Yeah, absolutely. I think people were very justified in being upset. When stuff rotates in this game, it typically happens on a weekly or daily schedule. And for a dungeon to not rotate for 3 whole weeks felt a little unreasonable. That's not even really the worst part in my opinion, though. The other major problem here is the loot, which, if I'm being honest, it was pretty mid. I have, like, I think 2, maybe 3 Rite of the 9 weapons that I use on the regular, and one of those is a sidearm. And I'm replacing that with a peace bond from Iron Banner. And I know Bungie wants us to chase more than just No Survivors, Cold Comfort, and New Pacific Epitaph. And even then, I'm mostly using those because it's the best wayframe I have. And that is in contention with another Iron Banner weapon in my vault, and the SMG is just the best SMG I have, to be honest. Cold Comfort, you know, it's there, but if you've got Hez and Vengeance from Vault of Glass, that thing is basically a strict upgrade. I didn't find any of the other Rite of the 9 weapons to feel even remotely worth chasing, except for a 1-2 punch French barrel shotgun, and outside of going into that dungeon for day 1 raid prep purposes, which is mostly about being in a contest environment and not the loot, I'm not really that interested in playing it outside of just hanging out with my friends. I ultimately think that Rite of the 9 was not the Pantheon-like success that Bungie was hoping it would. I think the concept was sound, that the execution was a bit lacking, especially on the loot side. These weapons had no new perks, meaning that they were mostly already power crept by stuff we already have. I will give Bungie credit where it's due. These dungeon refreshes felt very fun and definitely not overbearing, and I think that if they do something like this again, they just need to update the loot side, assuming that the dungeon refresh quality remains the same. Okay, I think that's everything as it currently is. Let's talk about the future. New stat system is going to be here. I'm not going over this in its entirety since I plan on making a new video to update my how to build craft guide, but the short and sweet of it is that stat tiers are now gone. Every point you put into a stat is now going to matter. Stats are also maxing out at 200 instead of 100. Those stats above 100 have a secondary effect instead of just contributing more towards 0 to 100. These 6 stats from Armor 2.0 are gone. 3 of them are getting tossed into the void entirely, and the other 3 are getting soft reworked. Mobility, recovery, and resilience are gone, having been replaced with weapons, health, and class respectively. Intellect, discipline, and strength have been reworked entirely and are now super, grenade, and strength. Main thing to note here is now that these stats affect all ability energy gains instead of just your passive cooldowns, which I think could change, Bungie. The 3 stats that have been replaced are being implemented into base kit for everyone, with the old effects of mobility at tier 3 for Titans and Warlocks, tier 4 for Hunters. The old effects of tier 6 recovery are baked into base kit, and the old effects of tier 10 resil are going into base kit. Yes, tier 10. In terms of my thoughts on it, we have not had a stat rework or resense since Shadowkeep. And in my opinion, this is well overdue, seeing as our current stat meta has just gotten very stale very fast. And to be honest, I kind of despise how homogenous. Max resil, and then you go for high strength or discipline, and dump whatever leftovers in recovery. With the new system, I see a good reason to build into any of these 6 stats rather than just taking a cookie-cutter approach to every single build. Because you may want to build into any number of these stats, this solves a pretty major problem that I have with loot right now, which is you pretty much just find one good set of Legendary Artifice armor, masterwork it, and then never care about a single armor drop ever again outside of Transmog. Every single time I get an armor drop from a raid, the only thing I can think to myself is, ah damn, I didn't get a weapon. That sucks, because right now, I just don't care about armor in the slightest. I got another fucking armor drop. I'm gonna reach through this monitor. I'm gonna grab your temples. We're gonna put some bread on there. And I'm gonna give you a tender forehead kiss, game. Because clearly, your parents never showed you love as a child.
Well, that did not go at all where I thought that was going to go.
Now, you actually have a reason to get excited about the armor because, 1, all of your old armor is on the old system, so you're going to want to replace it eventually. And 2, with more build diversity, you now have a reason to want multiple sets of legendary armor because you will want to stack drastically differently. Speaking of armor, let's talk about how that works. Random rolls on armor are gone. Kind of. Now armor has 6 archetypes, with each one having a primary stat it will spike the hardest in, up to 30, I believe, and a secondary stat that it will spike slightly less hard in, up to 25. Again, I think. It will also have a random tertiary stat that will roll a decent amount of stats. I don't remember the number off rip. The armor also has a tier system, similar to the way that weapons will have a tier system, with higher tiers giving higher stats, and tier 5 armor will have 11 mod energy instead of 10. Masterworking armor now only provides a stat bonus to the lowest 3 stats on your armor instead of all 6 of them. I think the armor tier system and the masterwork system are fine as is. I think that those can stay relatively problem-free. The main problem I have is with the archetype system, namely the fact that because of the 6 we have, there's a chance that depending on your build, you'll be forced into stats you don't really want or need. For example, my Striker Titan wants a high amount of class and melee, with everything else going towards super or weapon. Class primary armor has weapon secondary, which is nice for the build, but the melee primary armor has held as its secondary stat, which I just don't care about that much. This means I'm either forced into going the super route for my melee stats if I want to stay on topic with the build. Only other armor with melee is the super primary armor. I think the system could work if it had more archetypes, and I'm sure that more will be added in the future, but I think that it's a bit of a miss if you're only releasing with these 6. I think with more archetypes, this will be a successful system, but as of right now, I kind of wish we had just kept the random roll system instead of what we're getting right now. Speaking of the new weapon system, weapons are also going to be on a tier system now, with tiers from 1 to 5, though the stats will remain the same across tiers as far as I'm aware. Weapon mod system is also going to remain the same, again, as far as I'm aware. Instead of having higher stats, higher weapon tiers will have things like selectable perks, enhanced perks, and for the first time, enhanced traits like stocks, barrels, and magazines. Tier 5 weapons also have unique visual treatments and kill effects, which I think is a nice touch. According to Bungie, our current day adept weapons will be equivalent to tier 3 weapons in the new system, which is kind of insane to think about. In terms of how I feel about it, I think this is pretty good. I imagine that higher tier weapons are going to drop from higher difficulty activities like raids and nightfalls, with lower tier weapons dropping from just everything. I could be wrong on this, though. I had to work when the last dev livestream happened, so I missed all of that. So if there was info in there, I didn't see it. It does seem like the higher weapon tiers aren't that much better in terms of raw stats to lower tier weapons, and that the main thing that you get with higher tier weapons is mitigated RNG. It seems like weapon perks are still going to be the main thing driving the loot chase, with lower tier weapons with better perks being better than higher tier weapons with worse perks. Seems like right now the enhanced perks will not be a make or break, meaning that having a higher weapon tier will be more of a, oh hey, that's a nice thing to have sort of deal, rather than being a necessity, in much the same way that adept weapons are right now. I also imagine that we will mostly be using the weapons we currently have for things like the day 1 raid, and people are just going to slowly migrate towards the newer system as they get tiered weapon drops. I do wish our current weapons got converted to the system, even if it was just at tier 2 or tier 3 for adept weapons, but I can understand why Bungie doesn't want to do this if it would make things get confusing, or if you get more perks or something, but I don't know. Now let's get to the new controversy with the weapon system, if you want to call it that. New weapons will have an intrinsic damage bonus during their season, dependent on the weapon tier. each tier, giving an additional 2% damage bonus additively per weapon tier, up to a max of a 10% damage bonus for a tier 5 weapon. Do I think this will be a big deal? No. I really don't. I do not think that a 10% damage bonus is going to be that big of a deal for most players. I think that maybe the number itself needs to be kept a watchful eye on, but I think that this is going to be a minor incentive to use new weapons without having to introduce crazy, ridiculous weapon perks to the game. To be honest, I think that if tuned well, it's a very elegant system. It allows Bungie to push us towards the new stuff without having to worry about power creeping themselves to hell, which is something that I imagine they want to avoid. This game is easier than it has ever been, and part of that is because of the insane weapon perks that we currently have. We used to have to shoot and kill each individual enemy in a room to get rid of them, and now we just don't. We have things like destabilizing rounds and incandescent that just obliterate things without even really having to look at them. I like being challenged in this game, and coming back after a 5-year hiatus to see that the Glassway was no longer the 45-minute adventure that it used to be, felt a little disheartening, because that meant the old challenge that I had come to enjoy and love was gone. Now, the blink away from max range with my scout rifle because I'm too scared to move away from my piece of cover because most things will clear me damn near instantly is not an enjoyable experience for everyone. But it was for me. So anything that Bungie can do to keep the challenge up for the players that enjoy that in this game is much appreciated from me. If this does become a problem, you'll certainly hear about it. But I'm going to be honest, I think I'll eat glass if it does become a problem. Speaking of power creep, let's talk the power reset. With the Edge of Fate, our power levels are getting reset to 0 Guardian power starting at 10. Soft cap is 200, meaning you'll reach 200 power by just literally doing anything at all and getting loot. After this point, you will need to acquire gear with seasonal bonus power, which now lives right on your weapons and armor instead of being applied to your seasonal artifact. You can get power bonuses all the way up to 400 through portal activities, and the power grind is no longer limited by a certain amount of drops. You can just grind as much as you want in a given day. You'll be able to get up to 450 by getting the new Prime Engrams, which are not limited weekly, and you can get as many as you want. We'll be able to get up to 550 power with Ash and Iron coming later this season through the same method. Infusion will now be done via a new currency called Unstable Cores, which come from, quote, a variety of activities, as well as dismantling unwanted gear with seasonal bonus power, or coming from gear with bigger seasonal bonuses. These unstable cores will be used to bring gear up above the soft 200 power cap that gets reset after each season. These cores do have an inventory limit, which I think is a little bold, but whatever, and will reset every season. In terms of how I feel about this, I'm overall pretty happy. I think resetting us down to a flat 0 base is a good change. To be honest, I think the soft cap system should kind of just be done away with at this point, though I guess I can't complain too much about it. I think that seasonal power living on gear is a great way to incentivize people to get higher power gear without just inflating numbers for the sake of inflating numbers. And that also somewhat nerfs bounty prepping, which I think is fair, since that's kind of always felt a little cheesy to me in terms of being a means to an end in the power grind. I think resetting power at the end of a season is a great choice, since it prevents the situation we're in right now, where numbers just become so ridiculously large that it kind of makes no sense if you're a new player. I think that removing the restriction on the power grind is also a very good choice, allowing people to just grind out all of the power in potentially one day if they want to, which is good. This also means your power level won't be restricted by RNG, since you can always just get more powerful drops out of portal activities. I think this will be a more enjoyable experience for most people than the power grind that we've been given, which is running around doing a bunch of different activities and just kind of praying that you get the gun in the slot that you need. Ideally, you'll be able to grind power doing whatever you want, but if Bungie wants to push people towards certain activities at certain times, that would not surprise me. It also looks like the power grind is going to be a lot less complicated, but a lot more of a grind than what we currently have, which is kind of nothing season over season. I think that's mostly fine, since the grind barrier is generally not required except for the highest level of activity. Our power levels aren't the only things getting squished, though. Damage numbers are getting a very large squish to improve readability. However, the actual proportion of damage that we deal is not going to change, just how that damage is displayed. Low tier trash is still going to die to 1 or 2 hand cannon shots, orange bar enemies are still dying to fusion rifle bursts, you get the idea. Overall, I think this is very nice, since at this point the damage that we do just kind of seems like an insanely high number, just for the sake of having a really high number. Having smaller damage means 2 things. 1, comparing damage among weapon types and strategies is going to be much easier since the numbers we're working with are much smaller and therefore a lot more comparable. 2, I think this is actually going to have the paradoxical effect of making big hits feel much bigger than the biggest hits of the game currently feel. A grenade does 100,000 damage, and a golden shot does 1,000,000. The golden gun shot is obviously much larger, but the scale makes the two kind of uncomparable. If your grenade does 100 damage and the golden gun shot does 10,000 damage, that is going to feel like a much bigger hit for a lot of people, because the numbers themselves are much smaller despite proportionally being the same. Overall, I think this will be appreciated, but I know that some people do appreciate the bigger numbers that we currently have. So, big question. Do I think Edge of Fate is going to be good, based on what I've seen? And the answer is, I think it'll be good, but not great. Do I think this will be a Forsaken or Taken King or Witch Queen quality expansion? As of right now, not really. I could be wrong about this, and I really hope I am. And if I am wrong, I'd be really happy about that. But I expect this to be sort of in the Beyond Light or Shadowkeep tier expansion. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but I don't think it's going to be the kind of thing that will be beloved for many, many years down the road. At least, that's what I've been led to believe by the marketing, which, well, let's be honest, the marketing for this expansion was definitely lacking. I mean, we got the reveal trailer for this expansion, last week, I think? If this video releases on time, we will have gotten the main marketing trailer, the main piece of marketing, 2 weeks before the expansion. In marketing terms, that is basically no time at all. Beyond Light trailer was almost 3 months ahead of its scheduled release date, which got delayed, but, you know, that was without the delay. Witch Queen was in a similar boat thanks to the COVID pandemic of needing to be delayed, but its official reveal trailer released a full month and a half before the scheduled release day, obviously before the delays. If you don't already follow Destiny pretty heavily, odds are good that you didn't even know there was a new expansion coming out, or why you should even care about it. And that raises another question for me of the marketing. Why should I care about this? The average player, I feel like there's almost next to no reason to care about this story, other than it's the new thing happening in Destiny. Every other expansion has had some kind of draw to it that gave you a reason to care about it. There's always been some kind of villain to stop, or thing to go get, or boundary to go cross, or some reason to care about the story that is being told. And this expansion just doesn't feel like there's much of that, to be frank. It seems like most of the player-driven reason for going to Kepler is going to be curiosity, but I'm going to be honest, I don't know if curiosity is a good enough reason for most people. Now, is part of this me not being invested as the content creators that have playing this game as part of their job? Yeah, probably. But if I have to be that invested into a game to be drawn into the newest expansion, I think that's a bit of an L on the marketing. But then we get to the community feedback about this expansion, and oh boy, I've got some things to say. Buckle up. I'm not going to try to call out anyone specific in this segment here. This is more of just a general commentary on the feedback I've seen, mostly on Twitter, and I guess Reddit. So I did my Twitter account off of a cliff. And the vast majority of this feedback is, these changes are bad, you're bad and cringe, and they must be reverted immediately. Which I don't think is that helpful. Bungie is trying a lot of new things here, which I think is a good thing. Not all of the things that they try are going to stick. But if we don't let them try things that may not work out, then we're just going to get a lot of the new stuff. And the game is just going to be very samey. And I don't want to play the same game. Why play Destiny? I've seen people say that our entire vaults are getting soft sunset, which is not true in the slightest. I've seen people say that the new armor and weapon bonuses are going to ruin the game and all of the loot that they currently have, which, again, is not true. Or at the very least, I will be shocked if it is. I, for one, think the new exotics look cool, even if the Warlock exotic feels a little underwhelming compared to the other two. But I don't honestly mind having a more passive exotic. Do I agree with all the changes that Bungie is making? No, of course I don't. Weapon stat, in my opinion, is a fundamentally bad idea, and they should have done the armor system different. Community feedback is so overwhelmingly just a storm of negativity. Some of y'all had me worried for the future of this game. Then I took a step back and realized that pretty much no matter what happens here, this game is going to survive the Edge of Fate. Destiny has survived hard times before. Okay? It survived the Dark Below. It survived through all of Destiny 2 Year 1, and it survived through Lightfall. The only reason this game could possibly go under because of this expansion is if it has the level of writing of a college student who turned in their 12-page term paper at 10:32 p.m. the day it was due because they forgot about it until the final week of class and wrote whatever seemed coherent to their brain that was fueled only by caffeine and spite for a week straight. I am not saying giving Bungie feedback about what you think could be improved is a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing. God damn, some of y'all are so negative all the time that it makes me wonder if you actually like this game. I, for one, really enjoy this game. Yeah, it's got its flaws, don't get me wrong, but I, for one, hope that the Edge of Fate does really, really well as whatever comes after it. Speaking of what comes after Edge of Fate, Renegades. Here is my response to all of my Renegades-related questions at this time. Ask me again in like 4 months when we know more. Right now, we know very little about what Renegades will actually bring, what kind of expansion it will be, and what the balance between Star Wars and Destiny will be. Initial reactions were mixed. Some people thought that Renegades was awesome. Other people absolutely despised the idea. In terms of how I feel about it, refer to the previous segment. In terms of community reaction, I think that there are quite a few people that are just a little bit out of hand. I think there are some legitimate concerns to be had with this kind of expansion, but to try and unequivocally claim that this will be a bad thing and will kill the game is overkill. Okay. Yap session over. I know that this was a long yap, so thank you for sticking through with it. Is obviously the last video you'll see from me before the Edge of Fate, and I imagine that for about 2 weeks after the Edge of Fate, videos are likely going to be on pause while I prepare for the Day 1 raid, I'm very excited for. I will definitely be making a video on, as well as my review on the expansion, and an update to my How to Build Craft video with Armor 3.0. Build videos, back after that, and streams are going to be on pause until the Day 1 raid. If you want to have a community or the edges of the solar system with, my community is always open for business, and we've got a bright Discord server full of a whole bunch of fun characters.
Now we're in Golgoroth's sex dungeon.
There's got to be a couple thousand OSHA violations here at least.
Necrophiliacs be like a dead ass.
I will know all I want.
We've also got a clan if you want to join that, but that's totally not required, so feel free to just hang out in game if you want. Alrighty, I'll see you on the edges of the system. Bye for now.